Hi everyone, my name is Krish and welcome to our first YouTube video. This semester I'm going to be a project manager at Product Space and I'm a second year studying computer science.
Cool. And hey everyone, I'm Tia. I was a project manager 2 semesters ago. Last semester was the head of projects, and this semester I will be the VP of professional development. And I'm a junior studying business.
Yeah, and the purpose of this video is we really wanted to show applicants on how to answer a product design question. During a recruitment cycle, the last round, we ask you a product design question, and this could be, for example, like design a product for the blind or design something. And I know a lot of our applicants don't have experience with these type of questions, so we wanted to show you a video on how to answer these questions, and Tia is going to be walking through that today. But yeah, we'll also like kind of pause during the interview to kind of like give you insight on like the certain aspects of the interview and how to do things. So, but yeah, let's jump into it. Are you ready, Tia?
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. So my question for you is design a bowl for restaurants.
Okay. Design a bowl for a restaurant. So I think before we get into the actual meat of everything and talk about the actual solutions and maybe even pain points, I think I have a few clarification questions that I wanted to ask first. So I guess primarily my question would be what is our goal with this? Like what is our main maybe value we're trying to extract out of the bowl? Do you have any idea on what direction we're trying to go?
Yeah, in terms of like a goal, I think a good goal would be like adoption. We want people to really start using the bowl in their restaurants. So I think adoption would be something to go for.
Okay, sounds good. And then also, is there any constraints in terms of maybe resources, time, anything like that for actually building the bowl?
Yeah, no constraints that are really that you need to keep in mind of, but I would think of
Okay,
feasibility for sure.
okay, sounds good. And then one more question is what type of geography or location are we looking at? Is this for restaurants internationally, or are we starting from the US or starting from a certain town? Anything like that?
Yeah, there's no restrictions on that. We could sell this bowl anywhere. But like we
Okay,
would probably start in the US. Let's think about it as that.
okay, sounds good. Cool. Great. Then I think I can continue going into sort of narrowing down what we mean exactly by restaurants, right? Um, just breaking it down, I think there are many categories of restaurants that we can consider. So, for example, one is super high end, maybe Michelin star restaurants that probably have many different, needs and many different sort of requirements that they're looking for. And then the next category, maybe we can think about it as one tier down. So just common restaurants that, regular people will go to on a daily basis, definitely less pricey, and maybe they're not as strict on certain quality constraints or anything like that. And then finally, one more tier down, I can think of maybe food stalls on the side of the street, or maybe supermarkets sometimes have restaurants within the market that's maybe a little bit cheaper. So do you have an idea of which user group we should focus on and which sort of direction we should narrow ourselves into?
Yeah, no, I think all those users sound great. I think I would maybe look into like I would look into high-end restaurants. I would see like how would they use this type of bowl. I'm really interested of you thinking of
Okay.
solutions for that and looking at their pinpoints.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll focus on high end. Let's just consider this is Michelin star, 1 star, 2 star, 3 stars restaurants. So they probably quite a lot of budget for this bowl. And then also one last sort of clarification point before we go into considering pain points and whatsoever. So when we talk about bowl, can we think of it conventionally as what normal people would think of a bowl? So something with enough containing space to contain both solids and liquids, and something that's used to carry and transport food essentially.
Yeah, I'm mostly thinking of a bowl that's used for food. I know you could use bowls for so many other things, but mostly for
Okay.
food.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Then can I take a few moments here to think about the pain points before we go forward?
Definitely, yeah. And then also to just break out of like the interviewing, like in the character, I think Tia does a really good job of just clarifying like just the differences, different nuances of the question. And also when she was thinking of her user groups, she checked in with me, and that's very important to do. Sometimes like interviewers do ask you to prioritize a user group on your own, but if you ask them like what type of user group out of these user groups, what do you think? Like they'll give you an answer on what user group that you should go with.
Cool. So I think I'm ready to go through some pain points with you. Um, I think there's like one way of how I approach this is I try to think about the user journey from how, maybe like diners or even the cooks or the waitress or waiters at these high-end restaurants would go from, the second they purchase the bowl all the way to when maybe the food is transported out to the diners, all the way back to the back kitchen where it's like being washed and then reused again. I try to think through that entire user journey to understand sort of what are the exact needs and of course also pain points that all these people at the restaurants would face. And I came up with four main points. So the first one is starting from when the bowl itself is being stored, right? Of course, it has to be stackable. Whether this is in the kitchen itself, maybe like in the shelves, or when the waiters or waitresses are carrying the bowls back to the kitchen, it should be safe enough that it's stackable and stable. So that's the first point. The second point I can think of is from after the food is being, put into the actual bowl, it has to be able to be carried safely, whether to the diners or back to the kitchen, right? Like, sometimes I've definitely had times when the bowl is way too hot to carry it, and then it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna drop it. So that's also another thing that I think is really important to consider. Third is quality control. And what I mean by quality control is, for example, right, at these high-end restaurants, the proportion of, let's say they're making a ramen, like the proportion of a soup versus the noodle versus the meat versus maybe like within the soup, vinegar, like soy sauce, all that proportion is probably something that's really important. And they want to keep it the same, for every diner's experience. So quality control, I think within the bowl is also something that's, maybe a little bit less common to think about, but something that I think is really interesting. And then also another way of quality control is also thinking about like, okay, how do I ensure that, the textures of the ingredients in the bowl stay the way I want it to be, right? So I want my soup to stay as hot as, when it first came out of my pot, all the way to when I move it onto my diner's table. Or maybe I'm making a cold dish and I want it to stay cold, right? So I think that type of ingredient and quality control is also potentially another pain point for these high-end restaurants. And I think finally is when the food gets to the diner's table, right? Like usually a lot of people, maybe they do family style, right? So they want to share things. And definitely had times when I'm trying to scoop soup out of a bowl to, I don't know, give a bite to my sister or something like that. And everything just spills, right? And the side of the bowl gets all sticky. So I think that's another sort of thing that we can think about and we can consider. So those are the four main pain points that I've thought about. Is there maybe a particular one that I should like focus on? Like, what do you think of these so far?
Yeah, no, these sound all great. I was just wondering what would your take be on prioritizing this pain point? And
Yeah, so I think like usually when I think about prioritization, I um at this point at least I like to consider sort of like what type of impact it can bring. And right now it seems like yes, there are maybe like three more feasible, more I guess you can say like realistic pain points. So like the carrying, the sharing, and then being stackable, those are all sort of like the core functionalities of a bowl. But I think what really makes this bowl stand out, and of course, as a creator of, can we assume that we are like a kitchenware sort of creator, stuff like that?
yeah,
So
that
I
makes
think,
sense.
cool, yeah. So I think for like, a creator like us to stand out and especially appeal to these high-end restaurants, we should really dive into like the quality control side of things. I think that's more of a feature or an aspect that people don't really think about as much conventionally. And I think that will allow us to one increase like the adoption of a product, which like back to that is what that was our main goal. I think that will like appeal to people. So first, there's going to be that user engagement as well, and then second, like if people are being engaged and they're like, oh, these are features we don't see from other people, then adoption will also naturally grow. So I'm thinking to go with the quality control point. Is there like another direction that I should take?
No, I think that sounds great. I think the reasoning for that is good.
Okay, sounds good. Um, cool. Then I think I'm gonna take, maybe a few moments to think through what are some potential solutions for the quality control pain point.
Yeah. And just to like pause again here, Tia does a good job of like kind of talking about prioritization. And a really big thing about prioritization is always looking back at the business goal, because you always kind of want to make a product that's around that goal. So she does a good job connecting back to that.
Cool. I think I'm ready. And also before I go into the solutions, I actually wanted to double back to the pain point that I was talking about. So within quality control, I know I mentioned sort of the proportion of the ingredients in the bowl. So maybe like soup versus, the actual solid, and as well as keeping temperature. But I think another point I failed to mention was actually also the ingredient itself. I know some people, especially at these high-end restaurants, making sure that each ingredient is safe for the user is very, very important. And a lot of users, maybe they, have allergies. So I think allergen control is also another feature that we can really dive in on. So like maybe there's traces of nuts that the ingredient has touched in the kitchen, but maybe the cook didn't know about it. So then whether it's the cook that'll be notified or the actual diner that'll be notified, I think that'll be another point that I wanted to add to the quality control pain point.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Cool. So progressing forward, I think I have three main solutions that I can think of. So let's start with, I know I sort of also had three sub points for the quality control. So let's just start with the sort of proportion of food versus liquid in the bowl. So for this one, I actually thought of a solution to have a sensor that would detect the amount of food or to detect the amount of soup in the bowl, and it'll actually alert you when it surpasses the amount that you can customize it to. So what I mean by this is, let's say we're having a bowl of fancy cereal, right? Maybe it's like the cereal they make it, the milk they make it, whatever. So fancy cereal, and they want to get, the milk only up to a certain bar of the bowl, and then the cereal to fill the rest. Then the cook would be able to, customize the sensor to, okay, I only want 100 milliliters of milk in this bowl, and that'll be the same for all the bowls, right? So then the cook would be able to pour 100 milliliters of the special milk that they create. And once it hits that mark, the bowl will start beeping, right? The bowl will alert the cook that, okay, you've reached the point that you want. And then the cook will know, okay, it's time to stop and then time to add the cereal. And then same thing for the cereal, maybe they only want 50 grams. Then they would be able to customize that. So the proportion would be exact for every single bowl, and quality control would essentially be ensured. Second solution is, so this one is more so for the temperature control, right? So this is creating a bowl that would be able to keep the food as hot or as cold as, the food is meant to be. And I think another point to add on to this is, it's not only just temperature, maybe it's also texture control, right? Like there are certain foods that's meant to be chewy. Maybe it's mochi, maybe it's rice cake, something like that, right? Then this bowl will also be able to cultivate that optimal sort of environment for the ingredient to stay that same texture. And then the third point is going into the allergen control that I was talking about. So this would incorporate maybe a little bit of an AI technology to detect exactly what type of ingredients is in my bowl, even if it's down to maybe like a milligram or maybe just traces of a certain allergy or allergen. And then it'll, once again, maybe like through beeping sounds or through certain alerts, basically notify the cook, or, even if it gets past the cook and moved onto the actual diner's table, notify the diner that, oh, there are traces of food that you might be allergic to, so watch out. So I think those are the three main solutions that I can think of right now. How do they sound to you right now?
No, they sound great. I'm just curious on which one you would like to kind of prioritize.
Cool. Yeah. So I know earlier we talked about how there weren't any, super strict constraints in terms of resources, time, money whatsoever. But I would still like to keep feasibility in mind. So I think when I usually look at prioritization at this stage, there's three main points that I think about, right? Like one is the user impact. So this is externally, right? Once we push the product out into the market, um, what is like sort of the scale of the impact that we can achieve. Second is the business value. So this is more internal to our company, right? Like how much maybe revenue can we produce out of this? How much our brand value would grow out of, pushing out this new product. And then the third is just, the effort. So feasibility, right? Like how much money, how much resources do we have to invest to build this product in order for the product to be safe enough to be distributed out into the market. So those are the three main things that I'll look at. And I think in this case, right, I think effort is going to be the highest for the AI technology, just because if these traces are so small, it's going to require maybe like nanotechnology or maybe very, very specific technology for us to be able to detect and make sure that like the rate is 99% or high enough that, it's something that our users can trust. So I think I've pretty much narrowed that one out of the question. I think that's maybe something a little bit more long-term, but it's probably harder for us to do that for the short term. The next, I wanted to look at, business value as well as the user sort of impact that this product can bring for us. And I think like the impact will be the greatest for the bowl that will actually, so the temperature control and I guess like the texture control, like that one I think will have the biggest impact, because I know a lot of these Michelin star, very, very fancy restaurants, what sets their food so different or makes their food so special is that they have, such precise technology or such precise techniques for creating all this food, right? Whether it's maybe, I know certain restaurants have like molecules where they make miso soup into like a certain bubble, right? Like then how do I, keep that texture going? So I think like texture control and temperature control is a really, really essential part of sort of that value and that value creation of these high-end restaurants. So I think like the user impact will be great there. And in terms of business value for us, because we are focusing on top adoption, if we appeal to sort of the biggest thing that they, view as important, then I'm assuming that adoption will also grow. And then finally moving on to the sensor that detects like the proportion of food versus liquid. I think that was like also an interesting idea. But I'm not super sure how much, user impact it can bring, right? Especially because for these high-end restaurants, the cooks are probably very, very, well trained, and they probably want to rely on their own skills more, right? Like for the bowl that keeps the texture, that's kind of post-production. That's, something they can't really control. Whereas for the proportion of the food, that's, part of their own skill set, right? So I can see how a lot of high-end restaurants would, not really want to buy these bowls, or they might not buy into sort of the sensor thing because they trust their cooks, right? Like that's not a category that maybe they want to meddle themselves into. So I think like with that prioritization method, I want to go with the food, the bowl that is the temperature as well as the temperature as well as the texture control. So the bowl that keeps, whatever food inside the texture that it was meant to be. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think your prioritization and your explanation on which one to go with made a lot of sense. I'm really curious on how you would track the success for this product now.
Yeah, sure. So I think when we think about success, it's always going to be metrics, right? Like, and I think in this case, since our goal is adoption, but it is also like a physical product, it's very easy to track first off by sales. So this, we can either break it down by revenue. So how much money are we generating? And we would easily be able to get that by just multiplying the number of like units that we sell by like the unit price of each bowl, right? So sales, I think that's one easy way to track. Another one is sort of that user satisfaction, right? So this one is also an easy one. We just literally ask our users, like, what do you think we should improve? Like, how would you rate this product? And then like, would you buy this again? Right. So on to the next point of would you buy this again? So this is essentially like churn rate, right? Like bowls is a perishable product, or not perishable, but like it's not going to stay forever, right? Like it's going to depreciate throughout time. So it's like, oh, are these restaurants buying the bowls again from us maybe 6 months down the line, maybe 1 year down the line? So tracking that churn rate is also another way of making sure that, our product is successful. And then finally, I think it's, just like also nice to think about maybe like certain metrics, like oh, what is uh like our margin. So looking at like our production cost, right? Like how much does it cost to produce each bowl? And then versus like, oh, how much are we selling it for? What is our profit? What is our revenue? And then like getting that profit margin. Um, I think that's a good way of also ensuring that like, oh, as a physical product, right? Like, is it feasible? Is it smart to stay in production? So I think those are the main four metrics that I can think of right now. Yeah, like how do they sound?
Yeah, they all sound great. They all look like they'll track the success of the product pretty well. But yeah, that concludes our interview. I wanted to ask you, Tia, you did a really good job. I was wondering if you had any sort of advice for our like future applicants watching this video on how to tackle these type of questions.
Yeah, for sure. So I think like I guess like breaking out of character here, um, the solutions that I listed, like initially it might sound like they're all too infeasible, right? Like there's a lot of like sensor stuff, like AI whatsoever. And I think that's a fair concern, but I think like we actually, even like myself, right? Like when I was still learning how to do product design questions, like that was something that I overthought about. A lot of the times, like interviewers, what they want to hear or approach that I usually like to take is I like to take two more maybe like realistic solutions and then one what we call like moonshot idea. So this is something like crazy, like something that you know never is gonna happen. But that sort of makes you stand out from your creativity. And then also I would say even like your maybe like bravery to word that out to the interviewer, right? Because a lot of times applicants want to stay, you know, maybe more conservative. They don't want to seem like they're crazy. But we would encourage you to actually give us a few more of those type of ideas because we think, or I personally think that's how you stand out. And that's how you make the interview more interesting for both like yourself and your interviewer as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think especially in these type of interviews, like being creative with your solutions is a really big thing. And even if you think of a solution that's really crazy, like if you have the explanation to back it up, like Tia did a really good job of just like walking through a prioritization. She talked about the adoption, which was our business goal, and then what business value did it bring and how much effort it took to build it. If you have those three, like some sort of prioritization, like matrix like that can explain your crazy idea, I think you're good to go. So definitely be creative, especially if you can have information to back it up. But yeah, that concludes our interview. I hope this was helpful to everyone. And if you have any questions, I think you could reach out to us on our Instagram at Cal Product Space. It's Cal Product Space, right? Yeah. I hope
I think
so.
so. I
I
think
think
so.
so. Yeah, but we hope to see you guys apply and yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye.
You guys.